Hello, my name is Ivan Bailey, and I will be presenting on The Turn of the Screw and the role that Victorian woman played in the novel. Henry James, American-British author, was born on April 15th. He is best known for his literary contributions and is also known and respected as one of the most prominent writers of the 19th and 20th century. Furthermore, he is one of the greatest novelists of his times. He is also praised for the novels The Portrait of a Lady, The Ambassador, The Wings of the Dove, and The Turn of the Screw. In addition, Henry James' contribution to literature has been praised for his social, economic, and political issues during the time of the 20th century. Postmodernist style of writing was accepted as a unique form of writing after association with the post-colonial period leading into the era of postmodernism. Henry James and postmodernism. The Governess and Victorian Woman. This slide will present the governess and the representation of Victorian women written in The Turn of the Screw. The governess, much like other educated women of her time, possessed a polished demeanor at the beginning of the text. Also, there are elements of classism when it comes to The Turn of the Screw and Victorian women. According to Steinbeck, respectable middle-class women in particular were proud of how little they knew about their own bodies and childbirth. In addition, Victorians live with a sexual double standard that few ever questioned before the end of the period. When we consider the case of the governess, her repressed sexual desire, her loneliness turns monstrous in James' Victorian Gothic novel. Likewise, the governess would like to have expressed her interest in her employment as strict business. On the other hand, the prologue of the story describes the governess's attitude upon meeting her employer. She conceives him as rich, but as fearfully extravagant. She sees him as a glowing high fashion of good looks, but of expensive habits, of charming ways with women. The fact that she took the job upon their initial meeting could mean she simply needs the money, but it could also mean that she was impressed by the employer's appearance. Women during the Victorian era. Women during the Victorian era, like Mrs. Groves and the governess, were frequently subjected to the male-dominant capital culture, customs, laws, and rules. Thus, they were often deprived of their civil rights, and they were also viewed in the eyes of the public sphere as midwives or women only aspiring or concerned with keeping a successful and balanced household, or made to take care of children. Women who took jobs or occupations outside of the household environment were ever so often less likely to become married. However, women who were married during this period of the Victorian era were often given more social leverage and power than women who were not married. Another role that Victorian women were restricted to during the time Henry James wrote The Turn of the Screw was the role for governess to properly educate the children. Subsequently, within the backdrop of the story, James brings the different level of classism to light and how it places restrictions upon women, thus aligning Mrs. Groves to a marginalized working and underclass of women. Women characters in The Turn of the Screw. For example, there are only two women characters in The Turn of the Screw, the governess and Mrs. Groves. Mrs. Groves is a minor character, and she is depicted by James in the light of classical, stereotypical Victorian women gender roles. She is represented as a mother figure and a domestic servant. In addition to the representation of Mrs. Groves and her character, she is also seen as the quintessential Victorian woman. There are many different layers and dimensions to her character. She is represented as modest and pure-hearted and lacks formal education. An inference can be made about her social status that suggests that she may come from a lower social economic background. She is also a servant at Bly, who provides the governess with a sense of love and support. She is also acting as a friend and confidant to the governess. As the readers have full omniscience of the storyline, Mrs. Groves is empathetic and she is willing to listen to the governess, although she does not fully agree with her logic about the governess' experiences at Bly. During the time that Henry James wrote The Turn of the Screw, authors were subjected to censorship trials for their radical portrayal of sexual and the use of explicit language. There seems to be a revolving door of servants that all have repressed sexual interests and then exert their repressed sexual desires towards children. It is likely that Miles was expelled because he did something so terrible that his crimes were unspeakable for the English of the Victorian era. Readers will never know the truth about these acts. Regarding the representation of Victorian women in The Turn of the Screw, if we venture to consider that Miles' offense at school are sexual in nature, Miles belonged to multiple romantic triangles, including those with Flora as a Victorian young lady, as well as his servant Peter Quint, and the new governess. To be exact, there are at least two triangles that are apparent in the story: Miles, Flora, and the governess, Miles, Flora, and Peter Quint. Carl Jung's theory, in association with The Turn of the Screw and The Shadow, as a Gothic text in the representation of Victorian women. According to Carl Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and founder of the psychoanalysis, suggests that the shadow is the unconscious part of a person's character, behavior, or personality that does not parallel with the idea of their ideal version of a person and who they aspire to be in life. Jung calls this personality trait the ego, the ideal ego. Hence, the ego is also deemed the uncivilized and undesirable part of a person's character. For example, the ideal ego can be personality and emotional traits such as feelings towards another person, hatred. Other emotions associated with the ideal shadow are feelings such as sadness, rage, dishonesty, arrogance, greediness, or manipulation. These emotional traits are often considered uncivilized or primitive qualities of human nature. Playing in the Dark as a gothic dark romance in the turn of the screw. In this slide, we see the governess as a confidant and a friend to Miles. If we were to consider Miles's age based on the governess description, I would say that Miles is no older than 13. At the beginning of chapter 3, she describes Miles as incredibly beautiful, a sort of passion, of tenderness for him was swept away by his presence. What I then and there took him to my heart for was something divine that I have never found to the same degree in any child. His incredible little air of knowing nothing in the world but love. The governess' romantic interest in the boy are certainly evident here. Not only this, but she notes his vulnerability, which is why I say his age at the beginning of the stage of puberty. He knows very little, as children often do, but still shows an eagerness to love, as many teenagers do. She views him as different, a more exceptional or mature lover than other children. Yonic and sexual symbolism in the storyline, as well as secrets between Flora and the governess. In chapter 2, the governess leaves Flora to work in the classroom. She leaves Flora with normal school supplies, but also a copy of nice round O's. This book documents or symbols that the governess leaves Flora does not interest the young girl, and the governess is disappointed when she notices Flora's lack of focus on her assignment. The young girl probably does not care about having sex with the governess, but the governess appears to be predatory here. One of the geniuses of postmodernist writers is the notion that postmodernist writers would have unreliable narrators. So we see the governess as an unreliable narrator. Feel free to pause and read this slide. Henry James as a postmodernist genius. In conclusion, regarding the representation of Victorian women in the turn of the screw, I truly enjoyed this presentation. I also enjoyed reading the text because reading it for the first time, for face value, I did not see the underlying meaning and the symbolism behind this classic Gothic text. I also enjoyed the representation of Victorian women in the text. So, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me through my Morgan State email. I would like to say thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.